I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and beyond. And we've got a doozy for you today. Joining me now, as always, to talk about these is Pam Hill. She is our co-host here on Gulf Coast Confidential, a pharmacist and an advocate for victims because she has experienced violent crime in her own family. Well, today we're talking about what could be a crime, but right now is basically being looked at as a wrongful death, if you will. So this is not the type of case that we typically cover here on Gulf Coast Confidential, but it's one that is a homegrown case, and it has made national headlines. This episode is called Death on the Operating Table, Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky accused of removing the wrong organ. And I broke the story for the Pensacola News Journal last week. It actually happened on August 21st. And in a nutshell, an Alabama man, Bill Bryan, and his wife, Beverly, from Muscle Shoals, Alabama. They have a condo in Destin, a small condo. His wife, Beverly, said that they'd worked hard their whole life. He was a retired boilermaker, and they loved this little condo over in Destin. They rented it out most of the time, but they had a little time to enjoy it themselves and come down and enjoy a vacation when he started to experience pain in his left side. So they went to Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast in Miramar Beach, which is just right next door to Destin. And basically, they did some tests on him and determined that there were problems with his spleen and that he needed surgery. Fast forward, and we're going to get into this episode, but they did perform the surgery. And according to Beverly Bryan, the widow of Bill Bryan, as well as their attorney, Joe Zarzar, personal injury attorney here in Pensacola, this Dr. Shaknovsky removed his liver instead of his spleen. Y'all, you can't live without your liver. So it caused immediate and catastrophic blood loss and death. So we're going to dive into this story today because, as I mentioned a little while ago, both civil and criminal charges, possible criminal charges, are being considered. The Walton County Sheriff's Office is investigating this. There have been no criminal charges filed at this point, but they are looking into it. And Joe Zarzar said that basically there's a waiting period before they can file a lawsuit. There's a period where you have to kind of do a pre-suit and evaluate if it can be handled without litigation. But in his opinion, I think he's certainly looking at filing suit if it can't be, because he wants to hold everyone accountable in this situation. Because, y'all, this isn't even the first time that this doctor did a wrong site surgery, that he operated on the wrong organ. So let's go ahead and dive into this terribly tragic situation, Pam. What were your thoughts when you first heard about the story?
When you told me about it, I was like, How could that happen, number one? I mean, I understand some mistakes and some surgical mistakes and stuff because of, it's real crowded in the gut and belly in there, intestines everywhere.
Is it that crowded that you missed the wrong organ?
No, we've got a liver about the size of a football and then our spleen about the size of a baseball. Now, we all know they're not shaped just like that, but that's just for reference to say, okay, that's much bigger, it's on the right side, and this is much smaller, it's on the left side, kind of in the back there. But I mean, everybody knows that. That's like what we learn in 4th or 5th grade anatomy. Here it is, here it is.
Basic anatomy. And I think that's why this story just went national. I think it just has this, it hits you in the gut. Maybe that's a poor choice of phrase, but it's like, why?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
How does this happen? It's just so unbelievable.
It's scary because, like, we trust our surgeons when we let them put us under. And every time, and I've had many surgeries, like knees from playing sports and stuff, and appendectomy and all that kind of stuff. But we just trust so much. In pharmacy school, I remember we were able to observe a gallbladder being removed. And I remember they told us, you're probably going to faint and blah, blah, because this was in the 80s. And things weren't like they are now. They basically open you up and go in and move your intestines around, scoot them here if they need to, do this, that, and the other, move them around. But I thought to myself, I'm like 19-year-old girl standing there going, no wonder you hurt so badly after a surgery. Because I saw, and they're like their hands in there and stuff. It's just more manipulation and moving. Yeah. And I remember they said I was going to faint. My friend, that was a guy, he fainted down my back. But, I didn't faint. But it was, I just remember that. I remember it big time because I thought, every time I have surgery. But now, with robotics and stuff, it's not like that. But what I thought was a la shades of Ben Brown again.
I know.
What?
I know. We have some crazy doctor cases that pop up here in Northwest Florida. If you're not familiar with Ben Brown, then you can check out our episodes, Beauty Buyer Beware 1 through 7. Mm-hmm. It's an ongoing case, but he's a plastic surgeon in the Gulf Breeze area that's been charged with negligent manslaughter and the death of his wife. He was performing surgery on her in his office. She was having several procedures done, and she basically coded, according to the health department and the local sheriff's office, Santa Rosa, that it was from lidocaine toxicity. Of course, he is denying that he killed her. And he was supposed to have his first pretrial hearing a week or so ago, first week in September, but that actually got put off. Mm-hmm. So that's been rescheduled to October, and we'll, of course, keep you posted on Ben Brown. But yeah, of course, my mind went to that immediately as well. He had numerous complaints against him, but none that you could find publicly on the Florida Department of Health's website. Mm-hmm. And it's similar with Dr. Shaknovsky. Now, I'm not trying to say that he's got a bunch of complaints against him. I don't know. We don't really know that. But what we do know is that he settled another wrong site case. And this was from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation. This is a medical malpractice closed claims report. Basically, what happened, according to this report, is that the surgeon mistakenly removed a portion of a patient's pancreas instead of performing what was the intended surgery of an adrenal gland resection. And again, this happened at the same hospital, Ascension Sacred Heart, Emerald Coast. So you can see why the personal injury attorney certainly is wondering, why would this hospital allow this doctor to operate on another person, knowing that this happened? And these are the questions that the family has as well. And I do want to go ahead and say at this point that we have reached out. I have reached out to Dr. Shaknovsky's office and left a message. I did not hear back from him in particular, but I did reach out to Ascension Sacred Heart, Emerald Coast, and they did release a statement basically saying that they take these allegations very seriously. They're performing their own investigation. They're not going to say a whole lot more because basically they're respecting the family's privacy, and that's also HIPAA as well. But they do say patient safety is their number one priority, and it remains that way. So, but as you can imagine, any good personal injury attorney is going to look at what did the hospital know, when did they know it, and did they knowingly put patients in danger if this surgeon has a history of making these types of mistakes.
Right. And where was the adverse event report on it, and why wasn't it reported to the Florida Department of Health or to the medical board or someone? Because we know a case was settled, but it looks like a middle part was missing. And I'm not saying we're want people to go through all kind of problems and stuff, but this is important. It should be documented, and there has to be some correction to it. Or I always just talk about what I know, which is pharmacy. When we have what's called an adverse event, it doesn't mean that even the drug got out to the patient, but on our workbench, if someone realizes, oops, I picked the wrong drug, we stop. And then we look to see what happened in the workflow or what we were doing. Was it the drive-through? Was it people yelling at it? Was it people on the way we had it on the shelf? Was it that we were on the phone? What was the problem? And a lot of those things, especially in the state of Florida, in pharmacy, those are called CQI, continuous quality improvement. We have to have those meetings a couple of times a year, even with ourselves if we want to, but usually with our staff, to say, when we've had these things, let's look back over. This is what keeps happening. We never blame people on that. We say, what was happening? But if it's the same person over and over and over removing the wrong organs, then even if it doesn't go to the Department of Health, the institution should say, he or she cannot do surgery.
We're seeing a pattern here.
Right.
Right. Well, in this instance, all we know of is two particular instances, but unfortunately, this last one was catastrophic. And according to the attorney, Joe Zarzar, as well as he provided medical information as well, several medical reports, including like basically the doctor's own notes of what went down during the operation and also the pathologist report. So this is where it gets really interesting. This is what's so crazy because I took part in this press conference that was held online, and it was Joe Zarzar and the widow, Beverly Bryan, who's just as sweet as she can be. And of course, she is devastated. You know, she is in love with her husband still. They've been together 33 years. You know, he died 2 days before their wedding anniversary.
Oh, no.
I know. And he was 70 years old, and they were vacationing together and enjoying their time. She even showed a picture of them in Cuba. And she said, we went to Cuba because he loved all the old cars. He was a real car enthusiast.
Oh.
And of course, I know a lot of folks, and you will appreciate this too, he was an avid Alabama football fan.
Right on. Yes, Alabama, Roll Tide, that makes everything okay.
I know. And so he was supposed to be performing this splenectomy, and he ended up removing Mr. Bryan's liver and basically transecting it is how they described it, a major blood supply to the liver, and it caused immediate and catastrophic blood loss that resulted in his death. And what's so crazy to me is that apparently he didn't even realize that he'd made a mistake, according to the medical records, because he labeled this liver specimen as a spleen. And after the procedure, he even told Beverly Bryan, according to her, that this spleen was so diseased that it was 4 times bigger than usual and had, quote unquote, migrated to the other side of Mr. Bryan's body. And I thought Joe Zarzar brought up a good point when he was saying, you know, typical human anatomy dictates that the liver naturally exists on the opposite side of the abdominal cavity, and it is several times larger than the spleen. So my mind is thinking, did he still not know? Or did he know and is just covering up? And who else was in the room that would have seen this? But according to the pathologist report, it wasn't until he was just, you know, investigating and dissecting this tissue that had been sent to him that was labeled as a spleen, he was like, I don't see any spleen tissue. What I have here is liver tissue. And so basically the family was also told that Bill's spleen, the whole reason he was supposed to be having surgery, was still in his body, and it had a small cyst on it. But it was nothing that was going to be fatal or even cause him to bleed to death. There had been a little bit of bleeding around it, but nothing that was major, and that hadn't even been touched. So it's just bizarre to read his own notes of what went down on the operational report, when he talks about how he looks at how big it is, and that's when he decides to open him up the old-fashioned way and start getting in there and cutting. And anyhow, it's obviously a tragedy. Obviously, a lot of people have questions. I've heard several people say they also, you know, have sympathy for the surgeon, that surely he didn't mean to do that. And we all hope that's certainly not the case. And I would imagine that's probably true. But my sympathy goes for the Bryans.
Right.
He's dead.
Yeah.
We have a 70-year-old father, grandfather, husband who is now gone. And I mean, a normal person would be sorry. And I certainly don't want him to suffer unnecessarily, Dr. Shaknovsky, but it's a sad situation. But still, you have to wonder what did lead to this mistake, what caused this error, especially in light of one that had happened that was not fatal, thankfully, just a year before. So I guess we'll get some answers to that later on as they start to investigate. But the other thing that really stuck out to me looking in those operational notes, and they call it the operative documentation, is that it talks about from the moment that he comes in, how he was complaining of pain on his left side. They do these tests. They determine that it's the spleen. They're telling the family, we recommend surgery. And they say not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 different times, we don't want this surgery here in Florida. We want to go back home to Alabama, because Beverly is also a nurse. And she even said during the press conference, I had an entire team of doctors waiting and ready to perform this surgery back home in Alabama. They're from Muscle Shoals. It's about 5 hours away. Each and every time, Dr. Shaknovsky is telling them, no, you need to stay here. This would be against medical advice for you to go. You could he could bleed out. And instead he bleeds out on the operating table. And then he even draws in another physician basically who's over him. And between the two of them, that's when they convince the Bryans to stay and have surgery. And I just could see the heartbreak in Beverly Bryan's eyes and in her voice when she's talking about this. And you know, just this horror of, I didn't even want to have this surgery here, and we agreed to it, and this is the result. So it's almost adding insult to injury, if you will.
It was like they push too much. There's something not natural about that to me.
Well, and of course, my mind immediately goes to, is there a financial reason that you would push a family to do that? Maybe they truly did feel like he would bleed out and it was dangerous for him to move. I'm not trying to imply that there's a motive there that they didn't have, but these are the questions that go through my mind.
Or have the surgery right then if it's so imminent. There's a lot of questions there, but typically when someone tells you no, they mean no. And then you can tell them, well, like you said, there's some risk in this, that, and the other. And they said no. But it almost is embarrassing for someone to tell you no 4 times. And it's just such imminent danger. I just don't get that. And a lot of times I feel like people use what's called AMA, against medical advice. If you do leave and go home, because we're free, we can leave if we want to, but it will be against medical advice. And that's almost like someone saying, that's going to be on your permanent record. It really means nothing, but it's sort of it scares you a little bit. We don't want to go against doctors. We trust them. We sign a paper. I have signed so many papers without my glasses right before surgery and just read right there, or you can die, on there. I've signed it because I trust my doctor, and I'm not planning to go in there to die.
Right.
But the fact that she had already called her doctors up in Muscle Shoals, and they said, we'll be waiting on him to come here. Of course, there's all those risks with anything that you do, but I just don't understand. There's just too much AMA stuff there for me. I'm like, why push that so much?
I know, and especially in light of what happened, it's certainly concerning for the family when they really did not want to stay there for that surgery. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky. We don't really know much about him. I did a little bit of research online. A lot of it, I think, has basically been scrubbed clean. It's hard to find any record of him on any of these hospitals that he was associated with. It's almost like as soon as this broke, they just wiped clean any association with him. But I was provided with some documentation about his background, his educational background before it was removed from the internet. But I thought it was interesting. Basically, as of May 2024, he was chief of surgical services at North Walton Doctors Hospital. And it says May 2024 to present, 4 months, and that's over in Defuniak Springs. Also general surgery at the Center for General and Robotic Surgery from 2020 until present. Was a field surgeon for the U.S. Army Reserves, a general surgeon for Southeast Alabama Medical University from 2016 to 2020. Did a minimally invasive flexible endoscopy robotic surgery fellowship, if you will, at Richmond University Medical Center back between 2015 and 2016. And then there's just some additional fellowships that go on from there. But it looks as though he also spent some time in New Jersey. Let's see here. Hackensack University Medical Center, Hackensack, New Jersey, General Surgery. Midwestern University in Downers Grove, Illinois, Chicago. And in just some personal notes about himself, I think he's a big Chicago Bears fan. So it looks like he spent some time in that area as well. And it said that he also speaks Russian. So I thought that was interesting.
Pretty smart.
Yeah, obviously an educated man, only 42 years old. He looks young. And so it's interesting to learn a little bit about him. But this is really all that we have is just some documentation from the hospital. I've not spoken with him again. I did reach out and have not heard back from him when I left a message at his doctor's office. But at any rate, it's a heartbreaking situation all the way around. I can't imagine any surgeon, because that's their Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. Right. I can't imagine. But I did also learn that he was a doctor of osteopathy, which I didn't know much about, but it's more like a holistic approach to, they can know everything from, not just the physical part of the body to being able to do surgery, but also psychiatry and a lot of things that takes the whole picture into account. So that's a little bit about Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky. That's really all that I know, just from the little bit that I've been able to find on the internet and that other people have researched as well. We'll have to wait and hear, I guess, at some point what he has to say about this, perhaps through litigation or other methods. But it's a sad situation all the way around. This family will never be the same. He will likely never be the same.
Oh, no.
But it does raise a lot of questions. Going back to Ben Brown, we did know that there were a number of patients who have since come forward and said that they tried to file complaints with the Department of Health against Ben Brown for alleged botched surgeries. And they either didn't meet the criteria that the Department of Health felt like should be pursued as complaints. They aren't made public. You can find, and so we don't know if Dr. Shaknovsky has similar complaints. apparently we don't hear the same level of people coming forward. It's early on that we did with Ben Brown, right after his wife Hillary passed. So perhaps there's a few. There may or may not be. We'll have to wait and see. But you wouldn't necessarily know to go digging into the Florida Department of Health's website.
Yeah.
It's not easy to use. It's difficult to find information about these physicians, and when you do find it, it's difficult to maneuver. It's all very fine print at the bottom of the page, and that's how we eventually found the insurance regulation claim about this previous problem, this wrong site surgery that occurred. It is on the FDOH's website, but if you don't know how to go digging for it, you could easily miss it. So my concern is for the patients of Florida. How do you protect yourself in an age where you can buy Google reviews and you rely on the state to keep a record? Are they keeping these records with the best interest of the patient in mind, or are they keeping these records and handling them in such a way, including the way they vet these complaints, that it minimizes their potential litigation, or is about protecting doctors in order to keep the money coming in?
Or just keep the system going. So, I mean, obviously he's well educated. Okay. He's young, well educated. Basically, I'm sure knows anatomy. So I have several questions about this here, like the anatomy, number one, and then who was in the room. He's not in there doing surgery by himself. So in the documentation of the operation, it tells us there was a nurse anesthetist in there, that there was a tech in there that held the retraction of the abdomen, and that I think there was another tech in there. But anyway, he wasn't in there by himself.
So the question is, why wouldn't somebody else speak up and say, hey, you maybe want to go on this side of the body and not that side of the body?
Or what are you doing? Or let me see. We have to, being a pharmacist, I have learned that side door way of talking to doctors. They don't like for you to come right at them. People rarely do. And it's politer to go around the edge, but sometimes you go, what are you doing? I mean, it goes back and forth sometimes. But my mom was a scrub nurse, and my boyfriend at the time, he was going through a fellowship at UAB, and he was in her department, arteriograms, and he was going up in the wrong artery. And my mom, being the scrub nurse, she just put her hands on his and pulled them back. And so that night later when we went out on a date, he said, your mom saved me. And she didn't even say a word. I said, because she's had to do it. She's a scrub nurse. She's scrubbed in. She's looking. And I mean, she's told him before, wait, hold up. I don't know. She's not a dummy. She's educated too.
Right.
So I have so many questions about that because, the case with Ben Brown, he's got girls in 11th, 12th grade, it seems like they're asking them to do grown women stuff.
Right. By all accounts, he deliberately hired people around him that would not necessarily question him.
Right.
That's nothing against them.
Yeah,
I think he was deliberately hiring perhaps some young people with inexperience that maybe wouldn't recognize that he wasn't necessarily following protocol, or certainly wouldn't question him because they didn't feel comfortable.
Or could last through all his tomfoolery and stuff and not ask questions. But so we've got the anatomy here, then we got who was in the room, then we've got the push, the do it here, do it here, do it here, do the surgery here. And it wasn't like they're saying, we're not going to get the surgery, or we think you're stupid. We want to go home to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, where we're from. And to me, if I'm asking somebody something too much, stop. I mean, I don't care. People, well, they're a doctor. They're not different than anybody else. Stop. You've asked somebody once, twice, and then maybe 3 times, but it was ridiculous. And then you pull a closer in to come help you close the deal
to have it there. He agreed to stay.
Yes, because they're outnumbered. Operation. And then you get to thinking, the poor lady came down here, a little retired wife with her little husband, to live their best life the rest of their years, to come vacation every now and then. She came here a wife. She left a widow in one day.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we want to share with our listeners, is what she had to say about what happened to her husband in the hospital.
And he was a wonderful person. He brought joy to every life that he ever touched. He was just the best husband and father that I could have possibly asked for. And I miss him so much. I know I'll get through this, and I'm going to be strong for him, because he deserves justice for this.
Is that what you would like to see come out of this? Is that this doesn't happen to another family?
Exactly. We do not want this to happen to anyone else. By this particular individual, especially, I didn't realize it takes so long for a doctor to lose a license, I thought it would be something, as soon as this was known, it would be immediate, but apparently that is not the case.
And you can certainly see it would seem shocking that a doctor isn't immediately put on some sort of restriction or emergency notice to no longer be able to practice, but that's not the case. And we'll have to dig a little bit more into how that process works. I definitely have a lot of questions for the Florida Department of Health between the Dr. Ben Brown case as well as Dr. Shaknovsky. But you can certainly understand the widow's concerns. She was like, I don't realize why it would take so long. And a lot of us wonder about that too. What does it take to finally get your license restricted?
What's
Ben
it gonna
Brown
take?
did get restricted finally. But he's still allowed, if he chooses, to practice in a state licensed facility under the supervision of a state licensed doctor. To my knowledge, he hasn't chosen to do that, but that is a possibility if he wants to. And as far as we know, there's nothing on the FDOH website that indicates that Dr. Shaknovsky had his privileges restricted in any way.
Yeah, I think it would be wise for him to take some rest and take off, because I just can't imagine this. And I looked to see why. I mean, was he tired? Was he impaired? Was he angry? I mean, it's just a mistake that shouldn't have happened. I mean, it's almost elementary.
Right. And I think that's, to folks who aren't familiar with him, I think that's why this story has gone international at this point. People are just so shocked. It's unbelievable that something like this would happen. And then a lot of folks that are familiar with Dr. Shaknovsky, I think, are also starting to question. I've seen some posts on social media, former patients who have questions about things that they experienced. And even Joe Zarzar, Beverly Bryan's attorney, had some questions a little bit as well. So we want to share this with you from the news conference.
You would be shocked to know the number of people that have contacted me over the last several days that says I was a patient of Dr. Shaknovsky at this same hospital, and this happened, and this happened. And so my goal in this litigation would be to find out how much the hospital knew or should have known. And because it looks like they at least should have known about one occasion where he had a wrong site procedure. But the goal would be to make sure and hold everybody accountable that knew or should have known, including the hospital.
So I think accountability is exactly what this is all about. What kind of mistake was this? And again, this is not about passing judgment. I've seen a lot of comments on social media where people, again, are expressing a lot of sympathy for Dr. Shaknovsky. I am not trying to say that they shouldn't in any way, shape, or form, but he's still alive.
Yeah.
Mr. Bryan is dead, unexpectedly, tragically, brutally, really, to tear him away from his wife and family like that. It's a very sad and tragic. So that's where my sympathy goes. How did this mistake happen? I'm so sorry. I'm sure he is devastated by it, most likely. But whether he is or not, how did this mistake happen? How did he get through this whole process? When you read this operational review, basically, just his summary of what happened, you can see step by step. He even talks about how the spleen was friable, which I had to look up, but that basically means that it was brittle or fragile.
Or easily irritated,
easily
bleed, or, just like it could mean both of those things.
Right, because it wasn't a spleen, it was a liver. And it's like, why did that light bulb never go off? And again, football, baseball, not the same shape, but basically size difference. You're talking about the liver being a lot bigger. Yeah, the spleen being a lot smaller. One is on one side of the body, the other's on the other. But he even tells the widow, gosh, look at it. It was in such bad shape. It's 4 times larger, and it had migrated. Is that even a thing?
What's wrong? That's what I'm saying. What's wrong? I mean, he's a physician. He's a surgeon. He's highly educated. And I'm not scolding him or anything, but I'm like,
just don't understand.
What were you thinking? What was going on?
Right.
And I see this right here. The reason we have so many questions is it's going to require a whole lot more research, and it's going to basically be this one's going to be a part 2, part 3, part 4 also, because we're learning as this goes along. But the parallel between the Ben Brown and this case here with Mr. Bill is that Hillary shouldn't have had to die, and Mr. Bill shouldn't have had to die, and there was no good reason for either one of them to have to die. So we're going to keep looking and researching and doing things, and I wanted to give you something here. You don't even know what I'm fixing to do, but this is your award that you got.
Oh my gosh, Pam, thank you so much.
I told you I was going to get it framed, and that's the one that you won on the Ben Brown story. So we're nowhere through with that one, and we're just starting on this one. So folks, give us some grace and help us out. this wonderful reporter, and this is why we know things like this.
Oh my gosh, Pam, thank you so
You're
much. It's
welcome.
just so touching. And I am so very proud of this. Reporting is my passion, and telling the truth is what I'm passionate about. And this is what I know, and this is what I'm good at is
Yeah.
reporting. So I
Yeah.
want to make it clear that I don't pretend to be a doctor. I am a lay person
Yeah.
on a lot of the topics that we talk about. But when it comes to reporting the truth, I try my best to be as honest and thorough as possible. So
Right.
thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I'm
You're
very
welcome.
proud of this. I cannot wait to hang it up at the house.
And fair. We want to be fair, and we want to be kind, and we want to be honest, but get in touch with us and let's learn some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do think it is about being fair and, again, non-judgmental. We are not doctors. Mistakes happen in every profession. Sadly, the consequences of this one had ripple effects that are far-reaching. And our heart goes out to the Bryan family, and it certainly goes out as well to Dr. Shaknovsky. I hate that this happened for everyone involved, but I do hope that we get some answers, because the main goal is to keep this from happening to other families.
Definitely.
Pam, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
You're
And
welcome.
we thank you for joining us as well. That's it for Death on the Operating Table, Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky, accused of removing the wrong organ. We appreciate you joining us for all of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. Remember, you can listen to Gulf Coast Confidential wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And you can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Just don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.